everyone. Thank you for joining us for our op-ed on writing and pitching op-eds. We're so happy that you could join us today. Corey, could you click the next slide? My name is Samantha Blake. I am the program manager for the Women Legislators Lobby. I'll introduce you to the director, Jennifer. Oh, you're muted, Jennifer.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for getting on with us today. This is about our 4th or 5th webinar that we've been able to do in these COVID months, and they've been really successful. So happy to have you all on. As Sam said, I'm Jennifer Blimmer. I'm the director of Women Legislators Lobby. And today we're joined by the WAND Communications Director, Corey Greer, to learn about op-eds and pitching. It's going to be a real interactive workshop today, so happy to have you all on. For those of you joining us for the first time, Women's Action for New Directions is an organization that builds women's political power with a focus for advocating for peace and security through justice. Our main goal is to amplify women's voices in the space of national defense and security, and make sure that our contributions are being a part of this conversation. Women Legislators Lobby is a national network of women state legislators that come together to influence the federal budget and budget priorities. One of our main goals as an organization, as a program of WAN, is to develop the skills of women legislators so that you all are successful in your legislatures. We also look to use that power to influence the federal budget so that money is being sent to the places that we need, like education, health, and infrastructure, rather than endless wars and more weapons. The next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to our communications director, Corey Greer, to continue on with the rest of the program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer and Samantha, for having me back to do a training. It's always nice to see so many legislators on. And I'm excited about this workshop because it's going to be a really hands-on session where, you know, we want the legislators and staffers who are on the call to leave really understanding, you know, what an op-ed is and have a nice first draft, start of a first draft when they leave. So, you know, we want the legislators, we want you all to be interactive, you know, make sure you're raising your hand and volunteering. And so we get to know you all a little bit better and know how you're doing on the drafts that you're going to be producing this session. So first, what is an op-ed? Sam, could you go ahead and share the results of the poll? All right, so almost 40% of you have never published an op-ed. So that's great to know. That gives us a good starting point to know that we're going to go over a little bit of the basics, and then we're going to, you know, dive into some of that deeper content as well. So about 50% of you have been published in a local paper, and then no one on the call has been published in a national paper. Okay, great. So what is an op-ed? Op-eds, in effect, are a medium to convince your audience of your opinion. They're a piece of persuasive writing, right? And I want you to keep that central in your mind throughout this presentation. Op-eds are usually about 600 to 900 words for print and digital papers. And we need to make sure that we are sticking to those word count guidelines because unfortunately newspapers have limited space to offer and editors generally won't take the time to cut an article that's long down to size. So make sure you're looking at those submission guidelines. We want you to know that, you know, we saw that none of you have been published in a national outlet. Maybe you have some reservations, maybe you don't think you're an expert. We want you to know that you do not have to be an issue area expert to get an op-ed published. But what you do have to have is some knowledge of the subject, for sure, and a stake in the game. And as legislators, you all have a stake in the game because you have constituents, you have, policy objectives and goals. And so you are the right person to be trying to place an op-ed. Literally, op-ed means opposite of the editorial page. So in a traditional newspaper, you would see these pieces, opposite of the page where the editorial presents their opinions. Meaning that you usually would take a viewpoint that differs from the editorial board. But these days, op-eds are pretty much synonymous with opinion pieces, and you'll see that most papers have full-fledged opinion sections rather on their websites and then also in their actual printed papers. So we'll see a couple examples of this. So this example is from the New York Times opinion section. You want a Confederate monument. My body is a Confederate monument. And this is written by a poet who's obviously a great writer, but she might not be a policy wonk on the Hill. But what she does have is she has a unique story. She has stake in the game. She has perspective to offer. And that is something that opinion editors love. And then you'll also see that opinion sections also include the editorial board actually writing their own opinion pieces. So you'll see that as well. So here, this is from, I think, the Tampa Bay Times. The editorial board wrote it, and it's "Why Are Some Florida Leaders So Hypocritical on Local Control?" So you'll see that op-eds and opinion pieces kind of run the gamut. So why do we write op-eds as state legislators? You have a number of different reasons. The first is that op-eds change public opinion. In a recent study, the Washington Post found that despite large differences in demographics and initial political beliefs, op-eds were both persuasive to the mass public and elites, but marginally more persuasive among the mass public. So that means, by elites, they mean, stakeholders, congressional offices, those sorts of people. But we know that you actually, when you get an opinion piece published, you can get the attention of these people and you can actually change their opinion. So that's why we use them. Let's look at some examples of state legislators using op-eds to change opinion. So here, this recent piece, this was a piece that we helped a former legislator, Jennifer Seelig out of Utah, and former legislator Ryan Wilcox write for The Hill. And it's called "Don't Bomb America Again." And in this piece, they're urging the Trump administration to not resume nuclear testing. So this is important for them, of course, because former constituents and people, fellow members of their state, suffered severe effects of nuclear testing. And so they don't want it to happen again, right? So we're trying to get an opinion changed. In this case, the opinion we're trying to change is the Trump administration, but that's going to help. Public opinion will bolster those viewpoints. Another example from the Clarion Ledger. This is a Representative Sykes. So she wrote, "Tax Day, Where Does Our Hard-Earned Money Go?" And then so this one, she is talking about the Will budget letter and advocating for us to scrutinize and reduce waste and excess in the Pentagon. So again, she is getting her opinion out in her local paper, and so that she can do something, she can change something, right? She's trying to persuade someone of something. So that's why we write op-eds. And I think we're going to try now to get a volunteer from the group if we can. So what you'll do is you'll just unmute yourself, and then we'd love to know what you got published and what you were trying to do. Why did you write that op-ed? So Sam, just let me know on the back end if you're seeing anybody raise their hand. And if not, we'll just wait for a second. All right, we have a couple. The first one I saw was Sue. So Sue Arrington, if you could unmute yourself and tell us about your op-ed. You'll just have to unmute yourself. I think you're still muted.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Hi.
Hi. Indiana has a very restrictive vote by mail requirement. You have to be a certain age and other like 12 different things. So I wrote an op-ed piece in the spring to have a no restrictions absentee mail program. And in the end, we did get it for the primary. I would like to see us repeat it for the general.
Oh, I think she cut out. I'm not hearing her anymore, but that is a perfect example of getting your opinion across and then even having a success. So that is great. And then we'll take one more. The next one I saw was Antoinette. Antoinette, you'll just have to unmute yourself.
There. Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Okay. So before I was elected to the state legislature, I saw that undocumented immigrants were afraid to go to the courthouse because of the Trump administration's detaining people at the courthouses. And I'm a lawyer, so this just felt like a huge violation of access to justice. So I wrote an opinion piece in the Santa Fe newspaper, and now I'm writing a bill to do exactly the same thing.
That's great. That's another great example. All right, so thank you both for your examples. And, I want everybody else on the call to be thinking of, of course, things that you would like to advocate for so that when we start drafting, you are all ready to go. Oh, and we have one more example. I'll just briefly mention this one. So this is Representative McDaniels, and she also got published in the Post and the Courier, which is her local paper, and she is advocating for to reallocate defense spending to fund needs at home. So a great piece. All right. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of drafting, just want to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to do. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the prep work that is involved in drafting an op-ed. We're going to go through the intro, body, and conclusion, and we're going to do some practicing here and then share some examples. And then we're going to talk about naming your piece, which is very important to get the editor's attention and also, get people to click on your article to read it. And then we're going to talk about how you actually place it. So now you have this beautiful draft. Who do you send it to, and what do you include in that pitch in order for the editor to take your submission? Okay, so the prep work. Before you start writing, we need you to ask yourself these 3 questions. So the first, we prefaced it a little bit. What are you advocating for? So this is your central argument. This is going to be the thesis. This is what you're trying to persuade someone to do. The second point is who you're talking to. So you need to know who you're trying to persuade. Not all outlets are made equal, as we know. Not all people read the same newspapers. So we need to make sure we know your audience. That way we can put it in the right place. And lastly, why now? So you have this argument or this policy, you know who you want to convince, but why is now the right time? This is really important for editors because, maybe you have a great policy argument, but if no one's talking about this right now, or you can't relate it to any current events, then they're probably not going to take it. So let's go in a little bit of depth on each one. So it's very important that when you're advocating for something in an op-ed, I told you that we have a short amount of space, word count wise. So we need to make one point, and we need to make it really well. So you can't solve the whole world's problems in 750 words. So we want you to be satisfied with making a single point clearly and persuasively. And if you can't explain what your whole article is about in 1 or 2 sentences, then you're really trying to do too much. So here are some examples of what a great op-ed piece would be predicated on. So, for example, the Trump administration should not resume nuclear testing. That's your thesis. That's what you're advocating for. All the components would be related to that one central question. Maybe it's smarter choices in Pentagon spending would help the United States fund departments that help combat the coronavirus and get Americans back to work. That's, that's a little bit more complex, but we're still getting at one central point. Another one you might want to talk about is something like, my fellow legislators should ban participation in the 1033 program, which supplies local police forces with military weapons. So now what I want you to do is take a couple of minutes and write down your own. These could be completely different for all of you, but I want something that you're passionate about, something that's timely. So let's just take a couple minutes and then we will regroup, and feel free to go ahead and raise your hand when you're ready, and we'll call on you to share on what you're going to write your piece on.
And everyone should have received a worksheet from me, Samantha Blake, about 20 minutes before the presentation. And that will be helpful to complete as we go through the workshop. So I just wanted to flag that.
And if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A if there are questions that we can answer on the back end. Thank you.
Corey, while people are working on this, there was a question in the Q&A. Julie Sutton asked, how does an op-ed differ from a letter to the editor?
That's a great question. So they're very similar to start. The main difference I would say is length. So length and that letters to the editor usually are in response to an article that was published by the paper. So say somebody writes an opinion piece or just a news article that's advocating for a certain policy or that something is happening, and you know that you have something to say about that, you have stake in the game, then you could write a letter to the editor, and that would be about 150 words, which is really short. It's really about 2 to 3 very short paragraphs. And an op-ed is going to give you a little bit more room to flesh out your opinion. But they can serve the same purpose, which is to advocate for a specific policy or priority, or just to combat an argument that you see as flawed in the paper. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So would someone like to volunteer what they're going to be writing their piece on? I think we still have Jasmine raising her hand. Would you like to go ahead and share?
I will write an op-ed on getting access for regular Montanans to appropriate technologies so that they can engage in energy conservation and reap the benefits.
Very interesting. What sort of technology are we talking?
We're talking about a lot of different kinds of technology. Right now, our state statutes really promote energy efficiency only for large businesses, whereas small businesses and homeowners have the power to save a lot of energy, which would save them money and put that money back into the economy, and would obviate the need for coal-fired power plants. And such technologies are as simple as light bulbs and as complex as irrigation system, computer-generated plans for irrigation for small farmers.
Fascinating. So one piece of advice
Mm.
I would give you when writing this piece, I would probably pick one of those things. So I know this has also happened in Florida, my home state, for a while, maybe a decade ago almost, but um, individuals weren't allowed to put solar energy back onto the grid, even if they were producing excess energy. So, if we're advocating for one thing, whittling it down to something that we can explain in 750 words, we might want to, advocate, say, homeowners should be able to put energy back in the grid. So really simple. That's something that everyone can understand. And it doesn't take an expert to understand your argument, because you're super smart and all these policies, but we need to make sure that the reader can too. So that's just one piece of advice I would give.
Well, I'm advocating for a bill that I'm writing to create a position in the office, in the Department of Commerce, for one person to be that advocate for all of Montanans.
Okay.
So I have a very specific ask, and
that makes sense. So we need a representative to support the interests of constituents to get technology. Something short and sweet like that. That's perfect.
yes.
Great job. All right, so let's try Carrie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm rural broadband is my topic, and I guess my thesis statement would be bringing wired broadband to each home, no matter how remote, is critical to ensuring students can learn when schools are closed.
That's perfect. That's nice. That's definitely something that everybody can understand and relate to. So that's a great topic for an op-ed. Awesome. Well, you all are definitely on the right track. So let's keep it going. All right. So now that you have your topic, we need to talk about who you're trying to deliver that message to. So you're going to answer questions like, whose minds are you trying to change? And what papers do they read? You have, as we kind of prefaced in with a poll, you have a variety of different sources: local outlets, statewide outlets, national outlets. Of course, those are going to be your USA Today, Washington Post, and you would only target those outlets. So first, they're going to be a little bit more difficult to get into because there's more competition. But then it only serves you to use those outlets if you're trying to affect change on the national level. So I would always say, as you all have shown by your poll results, that you're using those local papers. That's a great way to affect change on the level that you're trying to. So just be thinking, maybe your issue is niche, maybe that technology issue is not completely accessible to everybody. So maybe you'd try something like an issue area publication. So these can be things like Defense One, if you're working on defense issues. Inkstick is a foreign policy blog, but you have lots of different options when you're trying to place your your pieces. And just keep in mind that if you pitch it to one and they don't take it, you can always pitch it to another one. Or we usually shoot high for what what's our ideal placement for this, and then you can always kind of work your way down the list. You can also try, maybe you're trying to convince your other legislators about a policy that you want to, or legislation you want to get passed. You could try something like Governing or the NCSL blog. Those are also great outlets. So take another minute, think about whose mind you're trying to change and what papers or outlets do those people read. And then write it down on your worksheet, and we will come back in just a second. And let me know if you have any questions about this. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll try to address them. Okay, we are going to keep it moving. The third question that you're going to ask yourself is why now? So op-eds are always timely and centered around an event, so something that's happening. And even if it isn't about something that's happening right now, we're going to need to connect it to an issue that's timely. That way we can get the attention of editors and also get the attention of the public who is going to be reading your piece. So how do we do that? We can use a variety of different things to connect our piece. So maybe it's a public statement that's published. Maybe it's a new report or data that came out. Could always be an event. So maybe you met with all your legislators about a certain thing. You had a committee hearing. Those sorts of things make great hooks. Could be an anniversary of an important date. So if you're working on nuke issues and the anniversaries of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are coming up, something like that. And then it could just be something that's, super popular in the news right now. Something Trump said or something that Congress decided to do. All those things make great hooks. Now we'll go over a couple examples of hooks just so I can really drive this home. So this one was, I believe, the McDaniels piece, but her hook was, "This week I joined women state legislators around the country in signing a letter urging Congress to, at a bare minimum, maintain funding for programs that strengthen our communities and calling on Congress to scrutinize and reduce waste and excess in the Pentagon budget." So her hook was the event that she joined the WIL team in signing this letter. So that's an event that she used as a hook. Right now, we all know there's lots of coronavirus things coming up. So this other example was that now, according to the Times, it's up a terrifying 22% over the last 14 days. So this is talking about new data that came out. So you'll want to be thinking about something to tie your piece to. All right. So now we've done all this prep work, right? Let's put it to some use in drafting the introduction. So your introduction is going to be about 100 words. We really want to make sure we start strong and clearly state what we're advocating for, because many people will only read the first couple of paragraphs. This is just a sad state of affairs, but people have short attention spans. So we need to make sure that we drive home the point and in that first opening introduction so that they really know what you stand for. A good introduction is comprised of three things. So first is that news hook that we just talked about. So what are you responding to? Second, we're going to establish relevance. So why are you the right messenger to bring forth this idea? Why should we trust you and your opinion? And then the third thing is your thesis statement. So this we already talked about, we already have that. So now we are going to put this together and pop it all together into an introduction. So could I please have a volunteer to read this example? This is, I believe, either the McDaniels or the Sykes piece that I mentioned earlier, but could I have someone raise their hand in order to read this great, the McDaniel piece, introduction? All right, I think we still have Antoinette and Carrie raising their hands. Would you all like to jump in on this as well?
Oh, sure. I guess I just never put my hand down, but I'll be happy to read it.
Thank you.
Today, 14 states catapult to the forefront of national political attention as Democratic contenders for president rally for a national stronghold. As South Carolinians with an early primary date, we're familiar with this process and what it means for our country. Primary season is a time for us to articulate our priorities as residents of both our state and country, and to urge that our future leadership take note. While the candidates have ambitiously taken on many pressing issues impacting South Carolinians, is that how I say it? Carolinians, there's another thing I encourage them to address: an excessive Pentagon budget that prioritizes weapons over the needs of those who serve.
Great. Okay, so which part of this is our hook? So the hook is going to be that the Democratic primaries are taking place, right? Everybody is talking about that. So that's a great hook. And she was in a state where that was happening. So great way to tie pretty much any issue to whatever she's advocating for. In this case, excessive Pentagon budget. So there's our hook. Then we have the next component, which is our relevance. So why is Representative McDaniel a good voice for this? And that is because she is, she lives in South Carolina. She's intimately familiar with this process and what it means for her country. So that's a great way to show that she's a good messenger. And then lastly, we have what she's advocating for. And that's super clear. She says it straight out. She says, there's another thing I encourage them to address, an excessive Pentagon budget that prioritizes weapons over the needs of those who serve. So that's those three components. Now we're going to take a couple minutes, and you already have your what you're advocating for, your thesis, and then you also have some ideas of what a hook could be. So go ahead and put those together with your relevance, and we'll get someone to give an example here in just a minute. All right. I'm loving seeing all the interaction going on in the chat. I encourage you to keep that up throughout the training. Make sure you're networking and helping each other across state lines. So could I please have a volunteer to read their introduction paragraph? Don't be shy. And if you're still kind of working it out and you're not totally sure, feel free to jump on and tell us what you're having an issue with, and we'll help you through it. All right, Jennifer.
Great. Hi there. So we are getting ready to go into special session to address criminal justice reform. And so I've been working on an op-ed to talk about that. My intro is, with police brutality and criminal justice reform on the minds of the public, we in the Senate of Virginia are committed to putting platitudes aside and making meaningful reforms a reality. As a member of the Senate Judiciary Special Subcommittee for the Criminal Justice Reform, I will be working with my colleagues to pass 7 specific reforms in our upcoming special session.
That's great. So you did a really awesome job of, getting that hook in there. Why does it matter? And definitely why you are the relevant, why you are a relevant voice on this issue, especially in your state. So what we, for our thesis, we might want to think of something. So what are we asking someone to do? Are we asking for support? Are we asking our fellow legislators to help pass this legislation? And that would be where we would, plug in that call to action piece to make sure that we're using this as, a way to explain the issue and persuade someone to do something. So that's a really great topic. Okay, we'll take one more from Carrie, and then we'll move on to the body paragraphs.
Okay. So as schools develop their reopening plans for the fall, it has become obvious that remote learning will remain a part of students' school life. As representative of rural communities, about 1 in 6 students I represent don't have access to the internet. Bringing wired broadband to every home, no matter how remote, is critical to ensuring students can learn when they are unable to be in the classroom.
That's beautiful. Perfect. I have no notes for you. Very good.
Thank you.
You tied it to something that's happening. We're going to be thinking about things in the fall. Kids are going to be going back to school. You're a great voice for this. And what do we need them to do? We need to make sure that they get broadband internet. So that's a perfect introduction. Great job, everybody. And I'm excited for, all of your op-eds to get out there and be published. So let's move on to the body paragraphs, right? So these are going to be your meat and bones of your piece. In general, the first thing before we get too deep in, you have your outlet, right? So you chose where you want it to be placed. The first thing that you need to do is you need to go onto the opinion page of that outlet and see what sort of structure they have, right? Read some of their other opinion pieces that are getting published. You'll see little changes throughout or little differences throughout different publications, and you'll want to get a feel for their style, right? So, but in general, there are some rules of thumb that we can use. So first is that this isn't your standard 5-paragraph essay, 3 super big body paragraphs. Normally, these pieces have 4 to 8 short body paragraphs, and they're about 50 to 100 words. So shorter than that you feel. Like, I'm pretty much 1 or 2 sentences, just press the enter bar. We're going to have another paragraph there. And they don't indent paragraphs. They're always just the text with a space in between. Sorry if I'm wrestling. I'll hold the mic out. Okay. So what does this look like? Here, I just plucked this from a New York Times op-ed page. You'll see short-ish paragraphs, 50 to 100 words, a space in between, no indent. Same thing on Washington Post, just 3 to 4 lines of text, and then you'll want to indent. So that's just a little bit about the formatting of these body paragraphs. Okay, so you have 4 to 8 of these body paragraphs. What is the content of them? So in the first 2 to 4 paragraphs, really you're going to be making your case and backing it up. What does that mean? So each paragraph is going to make a specific point to bolster your central thesis. The reader really shouldn't have to dig out the point of your paragraph or why it relates to this piece. If you're asking yourself, why does this relate to getting this legislation passed? That should never happen. It needs to be really clear, concise, and back up your argument. The next thing that you can do as an option is address a contentious counter-argument. So say you're advocating against increases to the Pentagon budget. Think of it like if you were talking to a friend or a family member and try to preempt what they might say to counter your argument. So someone might say, well, we need money to the Pentagon and to our military because we need to stay safe, right? Think about those arguments and then go ahead and counter it in the piece. So for example, I might say, well, the Pentagon hasn't passed an audit and they didn't spend all the money we gave them last year, so we shouldn't be giving them more. And that's a great thing to kind of, just in case people might have some questions about your argument, you went ahead and addressed that counter argument. And then the next thing you'll want to do in your body paragraphs, 1 to 2 short paragraphs, is kind of just sum it up and offer a solution or an alternative. So this is where you'll get to talk about your ideal world. For example, America has more important things to do than spend money on fighting endless war. We need to fund our schools, our infrastructure, and our healthcare instead. And so that's kind of the structure, the outline of what you can use for those paragraphs. And now I'll go into detail about how to make your case and back it up. Those paragraphs where we'll really be using the evidence so that we can get a feel for writing those paragraphs. So each one of those body paragraphs is going to need two things: evidence and analysis. Evidence is going to ground your argument. So you can use things like facts and figures, and a quick plug to check out our fact sheets. We have a lot of good data that you can just pluck out and use to bolster your argument. You can also use things like quotes from validators. A validator might be a member of Congress, maybe a scientist that's spoken out on your issue, a government official, really anybody that the reader would trust. So you're saying, not only should you trust me, look at what this other person said. They agree with my argument. You can plop in a quote there, and that makes a great piece of evidence. Another thing, and I really encourage you all to do this in your pieces, is using firsthand experience as one of those pieces of evidence. So this could be a story about a constituent. It could be a personal observation that you have, but this helps readers get to know you, get to trust you. And so you can always use those stories that I know all of you have to ground your piece. And then with each piece of evidence, so each paragraph, again, is going to have a piece of evidence, and then you're going to analyze that. So the analysis is your opinion expressed as an extension of the evidence. So you're going to answer questions like, okay, why does this matter? Maybe you plopped in the number, our top line budget is $740 billion for defense. And the average readers might not know, is that a lot? Is that a little bit? I'm not sure. So you'll want to answer the questions, so what? And that structure is just going to give you a really good way to move through your op-ed and not just sound like a report. The analysis part is crucial to flushing out your op-ed and getting your opinion across. So in order to drive home this point about, contextualizing your facts and figures and even your quotes from validators, I'm going to show you a very quick video, kind of break up the presentation. This is the Space Force, which is a new Netflix comedy series, definitely meant to be funny. So here's a short clip.
Of conflict and death.
As a scientist, you have loyalty to reason. Makes you a little untrustworthy.
How much was that prototype? 4 million? Middle schools. Cost as much as 4 new middle schools.
Okay, and apologies for the profanity there at the end. But that is what, he says 4 middle schools. So anytime you're using those big facts or figures, really relate it to how it affects and impacts your states and your constituents. Okay, so now we're going to talk about show you an example of how we do that. So could I please have another volunteer to read this example body paragraph? Feel free to just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Say hi to everyone. Okay, Pam Queen, one of our all-stars.
Hi.
Hi.
According to the budget, we are poised to spend an estimated $1 trillion over the next 3 decades on rebuilding and upgrading the U.S. nuclear arsenal. This spending will not make our troops safer or make us better prepared against threats like terrorism and cybersecurity. Spending this much on an outdated weapon system does not accurately reflect our nation's values, hopes, and priorities. Pentagon spending on nuclear weapons is out of control.
Perfect. So here we'll see the author gave us that evidence, right? So we're going to spend $1 trillion. But what does that mean for us in our communities, right? This spending is not actually going to make us safer. So that's the analysis piece that we add in. So now what I'd like you to do is draft your own body paragraph. And what we've done is pulled some evidence for you. So, you know, in general, you might want to do some research ahead of time, so in that prep work, pulling data points, but we've included some for you here so that you don't have to, a couple of numbers, and feel free to not use these as well. Use a personal experience that actually bolsters your argument, but also if you want to just practice, you could analyze one of these points. So we'll give 2 minutes and then we will come back.
Hey, Corey, we had a question in the Q&A. What is wrong with using indentations in body paragraphs?
So I wouldn't say it's wrong, but it's not the style that publishers use. So if you did use paragraphs, they would just take them out and, you know, put a space between. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it super easy for the editor to pick your piece. And so we just want to mirror whatever style they're using. If you have a local paper or an online publication and you see that they use indentations, then I would use indentations. So it's really whatever the outlet uses. Okay, and we're actually going to go ahead and move on. So if someone wants to volunteer what or how they produce some analysis for one of these pieces of evidence, or something entirely different for your own piece. And I see Sue Arrington's hand is raised. Is that for this part of the activity? All right, how about Antoinette?
Okay, almost a year ago, Alicia Lucero was shot 21 times by the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department after making a mental health call to 911. Since the Sheriff's Department does not use body cameras, we don't really know what happened. Alicia's family settled for $4 million and donated $200,000 of that to the ACLU for the specific purpose of working to increase the use of body cameras so that other families would not suffer as they continue to suffer. Now that the legislature has mandated the use of body cameras for all law enforcement officers, that issue has been addressed. But there are other aspects of that all families of victims suffer. The family has stated that almost a year later, they see that the officers who killed their family members experienced no consequences for the shooting. They see that the officers have not been prosecuted, and they don't know if they ever will be prosecuted.
So that's just hard to listen to, of course. So what advice I would give from you, that's a great kind of narrative, and you're building out the body paragraphs. But I would say you might want to put a little bit of analysis and what that means for what you're asking to happen. So, you know, the piece about body cameras, it's like, okay, so we did this. What does this mean for what you're trying to do? Because if we get too much into the story, then we'll lose our central argument. But I think all of that could still be included, but we just need to wrap the bow up back to your thesis. So that would be my advice.
Well, my thesis is so it's kind of a longish story, but I'm working on a bill that would change the way these prosecutions happen with police officers, because I just think that the district attorney's offices have too close a relationship with the police officers, and that kind of creates an inherent conflict of interest. So I'm trying to build support for a bill that would increase transparency, accountability, and timeliness. And so that's where I'm going from here, is kind of taking the elements of the bill and how I think they would increase it. So I was just kind of trying to lay out the story that got me passionate about this issue.
Yeah, thank you for that context. That makes a lot of sense. So for the body camera issue, then I would say specifically, when cops turn off their cameras, we do not have the transparency we need. And then this bill does X. And so.
Good.
Okay, great.
That's good. Thank you. Good.
Thank you. All right. So great example. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next bit, which is your conclusion. So just to kind of recap a little bit about those body paragraphs, I want you to use that evidence and analysis in each one of them. And it really does set up a nice structure to get all those facts and figures and stories that we want to tell out, but then also to put your spin on and put your voice on the stories. So we'll do that for each one of those body paragraphs, and then move on to the conclusion, which is just a really, it's going to be simple. It's 50 to 100 words. We're going to want to restate your thesis, just sum it back up. I know you might have gone some different directions with those evidence paragraphs. We're going to want to restate your thesis, and then connect it to the opening. Maybe if you had a hook that was relevant to your story, to your thesis, you could connect it back to that, and the call to action. So what are you actually asking people to do? And then maybe you add a punchy ending that helps people remember your viewpoint and remember your story. So I'll just quickly read one example, and this was from the Don't Bomb America that we worked on with former Representative Seelig. So she says, nuclear testing is already an ugly stain on our American history, and too many have paid the ultimate price for our nuclear arsenal. New legislation in the Senate could stymie the funds needed for nuclear testing or for future testing. We urge the Trump administration to reconsider breaking the moratorium on nuclear testing before it comes to that. So that's a nice, just a few sentences, sums it up, restates what you're calling for, and ends on a crisp note. So we're not going to practice writing the conclusion because I think you all can handle that part, but we are going to talk a little bit about naming your piece. So this is a really important component of writing your op-ed, because first, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's what's going to get the attention of the editor. So you're going to put your title in the subject line, and then it's going to get people to click on your piece. So 5 to 15 words, you can't have a full sentence, but you can get pretty close. And there are a couple of different things to keep in mind. So first, as I mentioned earlier, research the outlet that you choose. Different publications are going to use different styles for titles. You'll notice some of them have a lot longer titles, some of them keep them short. Check out what they do and then mirror your title based on those different things. It's a good idea to kind of entice the reader with your argument, but don't, to make them want to click, make them want to find out what your full argument is, but don't mislead them. Don't make the title seem like the article is about something else, because that's disingenuous, of course. So maybe you could surprise the reader with something. If you have a really super interesting bit or a really interesting quote, and then dangle the answer to make them click. And then also keep in mind that the editor has full reign over the titles, so they might completely change your title, but they would usually let you know and ask you if it's okay. So here are some examples of different ways and different styles of titles. So one is a question. So, oh, sorry about that. Okay, so one is a question. It was a bad idea to nuke the Marshall Islands. Has the US learned a lesson? So, obviously this piece, the thesis, is going to be talking about whether the US has learned any lessons, and you want to know what the answer is. Which would you prefer, nuclear war or climate catastrophe? That's I kind of want to know the answer to that question, right? So I'm going to click. Other ways you could use a how-to. So if you're describing a process, or say, how to increase transparency in the criminal justice system, something like that could be useful because people would want to know how, okay? And then they'll click to find out. You can also use a really short quote. So, if someone has a really quippy bit, a validator quote or something that you want to use, so you're leaving us to be slaughtered. That's very powerful. Or just use it or lose it. So that's another way. And then, of course, if we're talking about new data or report, you can always mention that in the title. So now I want you all to take a couple, just maybe 1 minute, and hopefully you've been kind of thinking about that. Think about what your title would be, and then how about this time, let's pop them in the chat so I can just read some of them out.
Hey, Corey, we had a question in the Q&A from Michelle Guyton, I think it is, about a piece she's writing on banning the Confederate flag in public schools. She has examples of instances and, of course, changes occurring in other places. She's asking, would I address only one at a time in each paragraph? It seems like it would be redundant, and how do I avoid that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? I was trying to find the actual question in the Q&A.
Yeah, so she's writing a piece on banning the Confederate flag in public schools. And it seems like she has a lot of examples of instances of changes occurring in other places. Would she do one per paragraph, or it would seem redundant? So I guess she's asking how to seem less redundant when there are a lot of instances of other people banning the Confederate flag in public schools.
Yeah, so I don't think that you would need to use all of those examples. I think you could do it in a number of different ways. One, you could have one paragraph where you say states including Idaho, Kentucky, XX have already banned the Confederate flag. We should follow in their footsteps, right? So I think you're using that as an evidence. So other people are doing it, right? That's your evidence. And then you would analyze that by saying, and we should follow suit by banning it as well. Or, so you could either name all of those different, the states that are doing it, or you could pick out one and pull an interesting tidbit, or maybe a state that you think probably wouldn't ban the Confederate flag, so it's a little bit interesting. So I would either use all of them in one paragraph or go into detail on just one. Okay, so we have some examples coming in here. So Montana's energy saving life hack. I love that. That's super popular. Life hacks are a popular thing that lots of people are interested in. And so you'll be talking about how we're gonna save energy. That's great. Is Mississippi more racially sensitive than Maryland public schools? That's kind of an interesting question. I think that I would definitely want to click on that. I think that's great. No notes on that one. Illinois mothers deserve all safe delivery options. I think no one would disagree with that. Maybe make it somehow put a little bit of intrigue into it, so people wouldn't just, if you have something that everyone's going to agree with, then maybe they might not be as interested. So put a little, like, what's the, you know, in any story you have some sort of obstacle that you're facing. So maybe, you know, throw a little mention of that in. What's precluding us from having those safe delivery options? Okay, awesome. You guys are kicking butt on your titles. So great job on that. And now we will move on to pitching. Okay, and we have just a time check. We have 10 more minutes. Pitching will go pretty quickly, and then we'll open it up to any more questions that you might have. So who do you pitch to? So first off, when you're thinking about pitching and placing, very important, I want you to treat it as, you know, you're emailing an editor. You're emailing a person, they're a person, you're a person. Think of them that way. You know, they have busy lives. I'm sure they have lots of going on. There have been cuts in newsrooms across the country. And so, you know, be sensitive to that. So you'll be looking for an editor. So I know some people have some misconceptions. They might follow a reporter. You know, you're seeing all these bylines from somebody who is writing really interesting work on the topic, but they're not the ones that can make the decisions. So you're going to be looking for the opinion editor. You can find that information on the contacts section of the website. Sometimes you have to root around for it a little bit, and sometimes people don't publish their email addresses, but you might have to do a little sleuthing, internet sleuthing, to find these people. Oftentimes they will have submission instructions on the website. So of course, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to make sure that you follow their guidelines to the T, and then sometimes they'll have a generic email address that you'll send it to. So it might be something like opinions@New York Times. And that is okay to send it to, but generally I would also try to find the opinion editor, and then you want to build a relationship with them. As I said, they're people, so treat them as such. So, you know, use their name, use their first name, write the email like you would when you're trying to do anything else that you're doing. Okay, so what's the pitch going to include? 3 main things. So why me, why now, and why this? Why me is going to be that credibility that we talked about. You're putting it in your introduction. You're also going to want to let this editor know in the email why you should be this voice. So a first sentence might say something like, my name is Diane Pappas. I'm a state legislator representing these counties, and maybe introduce the problem. So, or if you are a staffer, you would tell them your position and then tell them why this topic relates. And the second is, so why this? Why now? We already have our hook. You're just going to kind of put that in the pitch as well. So in light of the president's recent budget request, I've written a piece arguing the government spending should accurately reflect our nation's values, hopes, and priorities. Your readers might be surprised to know that they are each paying over $1,000 a year on average in taxes to pay military contractors, and only $58 on K-12 education. So that kind of tells them, oh, you're right. That's an interesting tidbit. This is something that my readers are going to want to know. And why now? Well, why? Because the president just released the budget request that perpetuates that cycle. And then you'll also want to add a timeline. So editors are busy. They want to make sure that you are pitching it to them exclusively, because the last thing in the world they want to do is get your piece all queued up and then you say, oh, actually, the Post took it. That will ruin a relationship. So it also helps them know that you're serious and that you're going to submit it to somebody else if they don't get back to you. So if possible, could you please let me know if you'd be able to use my piece by, and then 48 hours from the time that you're sending the email. I'm submitting it exclusively to the Star Tribune, and it's pasted below. Thanks again. And then I would always, if it's super time sensitive, I would follow up in 24 hours. If not, I might give it a couple of days. And as you build relationships with these editors, you'll come to realize, like, generally this person gets back to me in 4 days, or generally they let me know right away. So, you know, just treat them like a person, like any other sort of business you're trying to do, and just follow up, ping them if they don't respond. I put here an example of a pitch that I used for that Don't Bomb America piece, just so you see those 3 steps in full form. So you'll see in the subject line, I use opinion pitch, so they know exactly what I'm doing, and then the title of the piece, which is Don't Bomb America again. So I say, hi, Madeline, and this is somebody that I've worked with before, so I don't really have to establish my own personal credentials, but I say, I have a piece that's perfect for Changing America. Changing America is a bipartisan column of The Hill. It's co-authored by a Republican and a Democrat. They're former legislators. They urge Trump to not test any nuclear weapons, which he just said. So that's the timeliness, right? He just said he's thinking about doing it. Also, just today, Markey introduced legislation trying to block this. So then I give a little bit of the credentials just so she can see it really clearly, break it out, and let me know if it will work for you. I had a feeling that she'd get back to me in a couple days because she normally does. So I didn't give her that, you know, super strict timeline. And we also weren't really on a super big time crunch either because we knew this was going to be an ongoing conversation. So that's the pitch. Now I'll open it up to any questions, and maybe Sam, if you could feed me any questions that you've seen.
Yeah, so there was a question, shouldn't the introduction paragraph be the why now part of the pitch?
I'm wondering if talking about the pitch email, so the why now. So I guess that would be meaning that I put just today, Markey introduced legislation. I think that's also a great structure. I don't think that the why now, why me, and credibility have to go in that particular order for the pitch email. I think it's very fluid. Like I said, you're going to want to put your own personality into the pitch email. And for me, I knew that Madeline is looking for pieces that show both, you know, sides of things in relation to political parties. And so I led with that because I thought that was the most important part of my pitch to her. But this is something that's very fluid.
We have another question from Pamela Queen. She said, since I live in the DMV and the Washington Post is my local paper, what are other potential media outlets?
That's a great question. So I'm not as familiar with the local DC papers in the area, and maybe Jennifer could help me out with this question. But what we can do is we have access to a database of outlets and contact information. And so what we could do is we could, you know, pull that information and get it to you if you're interested. And we can also help you pitch, which I'm kind of preempting Jen's talk at the end, but we're happy to help out all of you all in pitching and placing and getting, even, you know, critiquing your op-eds. We're happy to help.
And then just on that question, there are a couple of outlets like the Afro, the Washington Informer, the Washington City Paper, DCist. There are also some online publications that you can reach out to. City Lab is one of them as well. What you'll find is that a lot of publications are really dedicating more time to local and state government, especially with COVID, because a lot of the response has been more centralized in like what mayors and governors are doing. So those are just a couple of papers that you can probably look at: Washington Informer, Afro, Washington City Paper, DCist, and what did I just say? City Lab, and also Route 150 or Route 50 is one that's like specifically for state and local leaders as well, and that's just a different opportunity to write articles that are for a legislative audience.
And we have one more question. Says, does the analysis also involve connecting your evidence to your thesis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way of putting it. I'm going to steal that for my presentation. I'm not sure if you need any more clarification, but yes. So if your evidence is, that we're giving weapons to local police forces, and your thesis is that we need more transparency, then you would, analyze the fact that we're giving these weapons by saying, this harms our citizens, and we don't actually know how many weapons are going into our local communities, and that, of course, would bolster your thesis.
That's all I'm seeing. That's it.
Okay, great. Well, we just, made perfection 4:15. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer. And just before I do, always feel free to, you have my contact information on the worksheet. If you have any, want any advice or want me to, provide some feedback on your pieces, I'm always here to help. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it to Jennifer.
Sorry, there's a lot of sun coming in, and I'm trying to make sure it doesn't blind me in the face. So first, thank you to Corey for holding this. We write op-eds a lot at Will, and I actually always forget their structure. So it's always good to be reminded that you're writing op-eds and not essays. So thank you to Corey for that. Thank you all for joining us today. I say this in every session. I know that COVID has ruined a lot of our lives and all of our plans, but I'm happy that we've been able to pivot in this way so that we can provide some skills-based training for all of our legislators in a way that we can reach all of you. I thank you all for some of you who've come back. I do see some repeat offenders, so thank you so much for being a part of it. Our next Will webinar will be an update on the federal budget for FY21, and that'll be hosted by our policy director, Caroline Dormany, who will be providing us an update on the federal budget and what to look out for, and that will be on Tuesday, July 14th at 3 p.m. As always, if you're interested in learning more about Will and our membership, please go to our website, and we will have information about our membership there for legislators, legislative staff, and former legislators. I believe I saw a question in either the Q&A or the chat about whether or not this recording would be available. And we'll have our recordings available to our members in our new membership portal, so please check that out. If you're not a member, please sign up. You'll be able to get more information like this, as well as network with other Will members. So I saw a lot of conversation in the chat about people sharing their bills and resolutions, and we really want you all to have that opportunity to do so. I think that is it on my end. Sam, do you have anything to wrap up?
No, just that we'll be sending out an email after this with more information on membership, our budget letter, and what's next for our programming.
Excellent. And as Corey mentioned, if you are interested in having Will pitch you to local outlets, please send us an email. We would love to be able to do that for you. We are currently working with the Pentagon budget campaign to reach out to legislators to talk about these different issues and elevate the national conversation about why it's important that we start to redirect some of these Pentagon funds, especially ones that they've snuck in to other bills that are designed to help in COVID recovery, and really explain why these are funds that your states really need in order to fulfill some of these gaps that have been caused by COVID-19. So either please send myself an email or Sam an email if you are interested. We'd like to put that together and get that started really soon. If there aren't any questions left on that, I again just want to thank you all for being on here. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. We love to see new faces, and we'll see you at the next webinar.